The Marc Canham era in Irish football came to an abrupt end today. The FAI's under fire chief football officer announced in a statement that he has decided to leave the association and relocate back to England. He referred to new personal and professional opportunities for me and my family as a reason behind his departure. The Englishman joined the FAI in August 2022 as Director of Football, and he held that role until 8 months ago when he was promoted to Chief Football Officer. Under the last few months, his tenure has come under fire for a number of reasons. There was the lengthy process to appoint a replacement for Stephen Kenny, with Heimir Hallgrimsson only announced as the men's national team manager 231 days after Kenny's departure. The nature of the process also came under scrutiny. The Ireland women's manager Carla Ward recently said in the Late Late Show that while she was appointed, Packy Bonner was leading the football questioning. Colin Healy's departure as an assistant to the Ireland women's team also came under fire. After it emerged there was a difference of opinion between Cannam and Healey over assurances allegedly given to Healey over his continuing involvement under Carla Ward. Cannam's ambitious football pathways plan also ran into difficulty, with various factions in Irish football finding it difficult to stomach. Now, less than 3 years after Cannam joined the association, he has left. And today, talking to me about all of that is Aidan Fitzmaurice. First, though, with Sky Sports, you can experience more exclusive live sport than anywhere else, including the biggest Premier League games every weekend, like Bournemouth versus Man United and Liverpool versus Spurs this Sunday. There's also every golf major, the 2025 Ryder Cup, every F1 race, Premier League darts, the 2025 Lions Tour, and much more. You can watch Sky Sports on Sky or stream it with Now. And I'll be joined, as I said, in studio by Aidan Fitzmaurice. And Aidan, while Marc Canham's tenure was rocky and people may not have expected him to last for a number of years in the future, still to get the kind of email today that he was leaving, in the near future caught a lot of people off guard.
We all thought that he would go eventually. Look, his family issues, he is English and probably didn't see himself settling here forever, so he was going to move back to the UK at some stage. But just now, even the timing of it, I suppose it's quite enough time for the FAI at the moment. The AGM is a long way off. The women's team don't have a game till June. The men's team don't have a game in consequence till September, so it's relatively quiet. But the timing of it, David Correll, the CEO, is due to give a press briefing tomorrow, so that's item one on the agenda for Correll to talk about that. But I think people on the ground, felt it was a very difficult job for Marc Canham. Wouldn't have been the most popular figure in Irish football. He would have annoyed a lot of people over the years. The time he was there, he felt he was trying to do the best thing. The football pathways plan, the 11-point document that he essentially wrote, he will feel will be his legacy, and he may feel that in 10 years' time, when we look back, if we do again have a men's senior international team capable of competing, that'll be his legacy. But at the moment, certainly don't think anybody's celebrating. Somebody is just moving. Nobody's died. He's just somebody's moving job. But there won't be a huge amount of tears shed within people I'd speak to within the Irish football anyway over Marc leaving.
Yeah, we'll get to the pathways plan in a minute, but it's interesting he was put up for a press conference, I think 3 weeks ago, kind of a state of the nation, kind of to talk about the pathways plan, to answer questions about some of the topics that I mentioned there. And he said at the time, I don't look too far into the future. In terms of our plan and our vision, it's 12 years and there are loads of things to do. But in terms of my own self, I don't look too far in the future in terms of that respect. I really, really enjoy the role working and living in Ireland. I enjoy working with the people in Irish football and around the FAI. I genuinely believe in what we're doing, and I have a lot of confidence in myself, a lot of confidence in our plan, a lot of confidence in what we're trying to do, and believe it will be a success. So as recently as 3 weeks ago, he was painting a picture of being committed and being all in. Do you think something changed in the last 3 weeks, or has this been, would you suspect, in the pipeline for a while?
It's probably been in the pipeline. We don't know the reasons. Maybe there is genuine family reasons that, he has a young family. My understanding is they did relocate to Ireland initially, which, to his credit, he did. Jonathan Hill was straight away, up against it in terms of convincing people, because Jonathan Hill didn't relocate to Ireland. He was on a plane back to England every Friday. So at least Marc Canham did live here and was living here. So we don't know, was it family, is it career opportunities? Maybe some people in that level. 3-4 years, is that a good time to be in a job? Do you need to keep yourself fresh? People who move on that, not even just football, but sort of executive business level, do you need to move every 3-4 years? Do people judge you by your LinkedIn updates more than anything else? So maybe he just wanted to move. So we don't know, but I think that certainly he would have, from his own point of view, he can speak for himself, but he would have felt that everything was a battle. Even there's something as simple as calendar year summer soccer, as some people call it, but having an aligned character. he would have seen that as a most basic thing, that every other football association in Europe, you have a calendar and you stick to that, whereas there is resistance here from, not just from Dublin, but a strong schoolboy section in Dublin, but also other areas around the country, people fearing about the competition from, particularly from GA and in certain parts of the regions. That something as having a calendar should be simple, but Marc Canham, as a lot of people who tried, people like Ruud Doctor and Wim Koevermans found out before, Irish football is not easy to figure out, and the politics of Irish football is not easy to work out.
Yeah, the football pathways plan for people who might not be on top of what it actually entailed and why it met such opposition from various grassroots sections of the game. Like, what was his kind of grand plan that he wanted to roll out?
He said, I think it was Green Pathway or Green Road or something like that, where basically it's a system, whereas in Ireland we never really had a system in Irish football. It was always thrown together. You know, you find a John Aldridge at 27 and he goes into your international team, or an Andy Townsend. We were always able to, whereas other countries didn't do that. France, Germany, Spain, Portugal, they had a system where you're mapped out at a young age. You enter the system. Maybe you fall back a little bit or you need to take a sidestep, but you get on a pathway as a young boy or girl and you follow that, and wherever your career takes you, whether that's as a professional, into the senior international team, somewhere else. We never had that here. So he wanted to have that where the pathway was there. So if you're a young boy or girl in Dublin, Cork, anywhere, you could join this pathway, and the aim is to get to the senior international team, men's and women's, and that the team will be competing again. So it looked fairly simple to put those supports in place. As we know, football in Ireland is hugely underfunded. The Irish Independent revealed at the weekend that the funding that GA gets, in contrast to soccer, hugely underfunded. And the problem now is the FAI have very little credit in the bank because of what's gone on over the last 5 years, trying to get money from government with the lack of conviction in government circles as to what will be done with it. So it needs funding to bring us where we want to be, but we're way off from getting the funding needed to make that happen.
Is this football pathways plan now, do you suspect is it going to be torn up? Is it going to be replaced by something new? Is someone, there's a line in Don McDonald's piece earlier, Marc Canham will remain in the role for a handover process that will see an interim plan established with a view to making a longer term appointment. I think people will probably be getting nosebleeds with the thought of another interim process and a long term plan and how long this might take to be set up. But if someone could well come in and say, I actually want to do something different, and all the time that's been invested in this, it's an interesting kind of period. It is,
and often these things, a plan, even though it's for the FAI, it's endorsed by the FAI, it's associated with a person. So, Wim Koevermans, previous director or technical director, would have had a plan that was put on a shelf when Ruud Doctor came in, and then his plan was kind of shelved again. So it often is associated with them. The danger is that people try and pick it apart and maybe ignore. There were good aspects to what Marc Canham was talking about in his plan, but I think there was just a lack of, he never really got people on board and people within the game, the likes of, again, when it came out, we would have been asking people that we deal with at the coalface. I cover League of Ireland, I'm not covering junior football or schoolboys or schoolgirls football, but the likes of Stephen Bradley and Keith Long and Damien Duff and people like that, and they weren't convinced by it. Damien Duff said he didn't even read the pathways plans, so that's a problem already. It'll be interesting to see what those people think, because they're the ones who are making an awful lot happen in Irish football at the moment. And even, I know we're going to talk about the Dublin derby in a few minutes, but if you look at the game in Tallaght Stadium on Monday, biggest crowd of the season for a league game, 8,500 people, which is impressive for a bank holiday when crowds normally fall off. But teenagers, Rhys Brennan, 18-year-old, scoring the winner for Bowes, Michael Noonan, 16-year-old, scoring for Shamrock Rovers. Them playing on that stage in a full-time environment, earning a wage, being able to sustain their careers, that wouldn't have happened 10, 15, 20 years ago. So that is a plus in terms of that's a sign of that pathway. Shamrock Rovers is a staging post for Michael Noonan on his career. He's not going to spend all his career at Shamrock Rovers. He'll go on to better and bigger things. That's evidence of the things that can happen. Cathal O'Sullivan, 18-year-old, playing for Cork City, an immense talent, playing for the first team. So they're the I suppose, the shoots, I suppose, of what could happen. But in terms of will Cannam's plan be picked apart? Possibly, because it will be associated with him. And there's still, within football, there's still that huge cynicism and suspicion of the FAI because of past mistakes and individuals in charge.
How much did that lengthy managerial search and kind of the farcical nature of it, and John O'Shea being the interim and then extended for another window, and just how long it took, how much did that undermine his credibility in Irish football, do you think?
I think it did, because his inexperience, and he admitted later on at one stage he set an April deadline, and he subsequently said, I shouldn't have done that. I don't think if you're trying to do that at that level for a job is that important. The Irish managers team is, in football, I think it's bigger than the manager of the rugby team. I think it's probably the biggest job in Irish sport to me. you can't make those mistakes, and even they will argue that they got a good hire and that Heimir Hallgrimsson has worked out fairly well. There was no leak of it. They managed to keep it. We were all in the dark the day he was unveiled. Similarly with Carla Ward, I think they've got a very good manager in Carla Ward, but the process really did undermine. And you wonder, we still haven't had answers to all those questions, and how, if he was identified that early, how come it took so long, and why would you say missed deadlines? I just don't think that Marc Canham had the contacts book and the experience to complete that. And we did suffer because Hallgrimsson only came in July, but we had international camps. Kenny left in November. We had international camps in March and June. So Hallgrimsson came in, appointed in July, came into the September window with no time to get to know the players, the staff, everything else behind we're really up against it from the start. Would have been an awful lot easier for Heimir Hallgrimsson, or whoever that manager was, if he had been appointed in, if not March, at least June.
I mentioned Carla Ward. Obviously, like, the departure of Colin Healy is a story that every women's international window gets brought up again, pretty much, about who said what and what assurances were or weren't given between Marc Canham and Colin Healy about Colin being involved in a future setup. That was another thing that just never went away and was probably not sufficiently dealt with and nipped in the bud or kind of owned at the start of the process. It's still going on, as I say.
It's still going on. It was incredibly badly handled. I said that at the time on the show, and I'll say it again. That's really the inexperience of David Carell and Marc Canham in handling that situation was. I thought it was appalling the way they did it. Take everything else aside, football, everything else. Colin Healy was a young man who was bereaved, lost his wife to cancer while in the service of the FAI, and the FAI treated him abominably. They really treated him so shamefully. Even the basic fact that he wasn't thanked I'm going over old ground, but the fact that Colin Healy wasn't thanked in the statement they put out to confirming Eileen Gleeson was gone. A very basic mistake in terms of your comm strategy, but a hugely hurtful one to someone like Colin Healy. So they still haven't dealt with that. They probably, the fact that the team are doing okay. They I suppose had a difficult night in the Nations League with the Slovenia game. They've recovered a bit of ground. They will try and build up a bit of PR from the trip to Páirc Uí Chaoimh. There should be a good crowd for that in the game in June, but they still haven't dealt with that. And again, that struck to me of inexperience. Marc Canham had a good CV. He'd worked for the Premier League, he'd worked for the FA, he'd worked for clubs in England. He had a very, very good CV. But that didn't really show it the way they handled the Stephen Kenny replacement process, the whole issue over Vera Pauw, how that was handled, and the Colin Healy issue still hasn't gone away, and players are still feeling. You can see that in the players. Amber Barrett, in her interview after the second game, Slovenia, took the point of noting, paying her tribute to Colin Healy. It clearly hasn't gone away for the players, and I think there is still a breach of trust there between the FAI and the players over how Colin was treated.
Yeah, obviously Marc Canham wasn't a very popular figure, and from the outside looking in, Irish supporters probably weren't like, oh, this guy, chief football officer, is doing an unbelievable job. But just when you see the announcement and it's so abrupt, that you just think, God, the FAI again, lurching from one crisis to another. Is this, you'd say, a crisis presents an opportunity? Is it an opportunity to get someone in there who is more popular, who I suppose can get stakeholders pulling all in the same direction? Kind of a guy who's from the Irish football scene, potentially. Would that be a more appropriate appointment?
That's one the board are going to have to wrestle with, and I don't in any way want to bring nationality into it. And with the amount of people that we have in Irish football playing abroad, Troy Parra playing in the Dutch Cup final the other day, we have people in positions all across football in the UK and Europe. So we can't complain that Irish jobs for Irish people. I'm not saying that for a second, but I do think that there was Jonathan Hill in particular, and Marc Canham also to a certain extent, the feeling was they didn't get Irish football. They didn't get it. Now, maybe, I don't think that's not to not being anti-English, but I think that there's certain arrogance that this isn't the way things were done in the FA, in the Premier League. And we do have a unique football culture in Ireland. We have something which a lot of countries don't have, is the faction fighting between most international associations. You have a domestic league and a national team. They're the two big power bases. Here you have amateur football, underage schoolgirl football and the League of Ireland, and three groupings who often will find more reasons to disagree than to agree. And people like Marc Canham, Jonathan Hill, Ruud Doctor, Wim Koevermans coming in from outside often find it hard to do. But so will they go for somebody internally? Someone like Shane Robinson might be a choice, or Niall O'Regan. They're two people on the staff of the FAI already, possibly to come in as in an interim role and then maybe get the job, which happened. The CEO, David Carell, stepped in, moved up from within the FAI to get interim acting CEO, and then got the job long term. I think they may look for somebody Irish, or at least with the knowledge of the Irish game, to try and smooth those and avoid making the mistakes that have been made. That doesn't mean the person has to be Irish. You know, there are non-Irish people working for the FAI, so I'm not saying for a second that you need an Irish passport. To the manager, Carla Ward, isn't Irish, Heimir Hallgrimsson isn't Irish. It's entirely right that they have career opportunities here, but they need to think hard about it and see, do they get somebody who gets it, because I don't think Marc Canham ever got Irish football.
And it is interesting, it was only 8 months ago he was promoted from Director of Football to Chief Football Officer. I suppose it was kind of reported at the time that he might have had an offer from the UK, that he was able to go and maybe get that promotion. But 8 months ago he was seen as someone worthy of elevating to an even higher plane. And now, since then, obviously there's been a good few controversies, and now he's just kind of exited stage left.
But even that move, Will, that was never flagged. I mean, that was just kind of emerged, through the ether. That I can't remember who wrote the story, but I mean, there was never any confirmation from the FAI that he changed title. Now Marc Canham has it. He has it on his LinkedIn. I checked it today, so he did confirm the change. But even that, why wasn't that confirmed? Where the board may be afraid of people asking, well, hang on, what does this mean? What was the process for this? Was there an interview process? Did Marc Canham write his own job description, give himself the job? Was there a salary rise? Money is a huge issue for the FAI. It's going to be for the next 10 years, Will, and that would be an issue for people. Hang on, well, did this mean an extra allocation of FAI funds for a better contract for Marc Canham? I don't know that there was, but if there was, that's a question that people at the General Assembly will want to ask, because everyone is crying out for funding. We can see that all the time. That's the constant source of funding for facilities, for academies. We are so far behind in terms of academy employment, career opportunities at academy level. We will not have a proper national team until we have fully functioning proper academies on a par with our continental or our British neighbours, and we're years away from that.
Just on the Pathways plan, interesting in CEO David Carell, his comments as part of that statement Marc Canham issued earlier. Marc and his team have shaped a clear vision for the game through the development of the Football Pathways plan. This is the first time we've had a clear whole game approach which the association is committed to delivering on, and which we firmly believe will set Irish football up for future success. So he's certainly hitching his wagon to it at this stage. He's
hitching wagon too, but again, there's a lot of ambition there, but again, the funding isn't there. And again, even in terms of women's football, that's something I think that Carla Ward is discovering now, and I think there is a bit of worry about where the women's team are going in terms of the constant drain of players from Ireland to the UK, an over-reliance on players through the granny rule, and how can you fix that? Whatever about boys football, how can you possibly create an environment where an Irish girl can stay in Ireland, can continue her education and have a career in Ireland? You just can't. You just can't do that. And that is part of that. And part of the plans, things that they've looked at, for example, they've looked at having an under 23 teams, international women's team, for example, to bridge that gap between somebody who's supremely talented, I'm talking about girls football now, somebody who's supremely talented at 16, 17, 18, but struggles then, it just gets caught in the middle somewhere, to have the OB international team in men's football or under 23 women's team. The FAI said they love to have it, but they just can't afford it.
Yeah. Well, David Carell, as Aidan mentioned earlier, will be speaking to the media tomorrow, and Dan McDonnell will be in with Joe off the back of that to probably provide some more clarity maybe on Marc Canham's departure, and also some additional insight. But it's certainly a very interesting and abrupt move, as I mentioned earlier. Before we wrap up, Aidan, the Dublin derby you referred to earlier, it's a pity that it got once again, it gets overshadowed. There's always an FAI, a bit of news that can sneak in and overshadow something. But Bows 2-0 down in Tallaght Stadium with, I think, 20 minutes to go, come roaring back into it and snatch a victory on enemy territory. It was a great advert for the League of Ireland, great that it was on TV on a bank holiday as well. A lot of people probably around with not much else going on, maybe got to tune in. And the crowd, I think crowds often dip on particularly for Dublin derbies, often dip on bank holiday Mondays. It's a theory that half of Dublin goes down to Caravan Parks in Wexford for the bank holiday weekend. So it was the biggest crowd for a league game. Obviously they had bigger crowds for the European games, but a brilliant occasion. Bows, I didn't see them coming back. I think if you had done a poll of Vox Pop of Bows fans at half-time, would you sack Alan Reynolds right now and let somebody else take over? It would have been overwhelming yes. Alan Reynolds joked about that. He said he managed to bring sacked in the morning. Both fans were singing, sets of fans were singing sacked in the morning, so Alan Reynolds kind of saw the funny side of it. But they really did. I was surprised at how poor Rovers were in the second half. They really backed off. Bows were there for the taking. Nothing really happened in the first 20 minutes, and that was a chance for Rovers to use that advantage, and they didn't do it. But Bows, I think, credit to Alan Reynolds, the substitutions worked. I think, the selection 11 he selected wasn't brilliant, but the substitutions, and again the story, a lot of focus in the last couple of weeks on Michael Noonan, 16-year-old scoring in Europe. But Rhys Brennan, he only came to Bows from Crumlin last year. Again, a young lad trying to find his feet. He's had a lot of issues with injuries. Scored the goal. He was brilliant involvement for the first goal, and to score the goal, and that to me, I think that fixture 20 years ago, it would have been older age profile, a lot of older pros, but to see teenagers scoring
And for Bohs, it's lifted them, because I think if they'd lost that game, it would have been a very grim week. They've St. Pat's to come on Friday, possibly lose there, and huge pressure on Alan Reynolds. So Alan Reynolds, in the space of 45 minutes from nothing, genuinely people did want him sacked at half time to being chaired out of the place at full time.
25 minutes, probably not even 45. And it's been a fascinating start to the season. Like, it's so much flux, there's so much changing.
No one's dominating.
Yeah.
Some of the defending, you look at it some ways. If you look at the goals, you think it's a great goal. A lot of coaches look at it in terms of terrible defending. So a lot of the goals you see are wide open, but the public love it. Look, 5 goals in Tala on Monday, 4 goals in Talca Park, 0-0 in Drogheda, between Drogheda and St. Pat's, but the goals are flying in. There's nobody running away, I think, which is the encouraging thing, that Shelbourne, this stage last year, Shelbourne were getting those 1-0 wins, 2-1 wins that won them the league eventually because of a little dip. Anytime anybody has a slip, nobody else has been able to take advantage. Shamrock Rovers have slipped up the last few weeks. St. Pat's have had 2 draws, but nobody else has taken profit. So I think it's good that the league is so tight. The top 6 are very, very tight. You could have Bohs, who were relegation material 2 weeks ago, are now possibly knocking on the door of the top 4. Galway seem to move up and down between, top 4, middle of the table. Any of them could come back, and Drogheda still holding on. Drogheda really we're not giving them credit for the success story they've had. Drogheda are still top, still there. It's an exciting season, and I like the fact that it is open and anybody could win it.
And the best team you've seen so far this season is?
I think St. Pat's. I just think that the St. Pat's, again, I don't think they've hit their levels. I think that how good they were in the second half of last season under Stephen Kenny, I don't think they've got there yet this year. Chris Foster missed a lot of the early games in the season through injury. They're missing Aidan Keena. St. Pat's aren't at their levels. Shamrock Rovers are a bit under par at the moment. Drogheda have hit a little bit of a bump with a couple of draws, but still top. But I think if St. Pat's find form, if St. Pat's get people back fully fit, if St. Pat's find their form, St. Pat's are the best team I've seen, but they've dropped points.
Yeah, well, plenty to play for, obviously. It's still early doors, and every team kind of giving it a rattle thus far. As I said, Joe and Dan will be here tomorrow to bring a bit more info on the Marc Canham story. But for now, Aidan, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks, Will.